Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about real-time Fallout. GidKid100 asked, can you make a video about what Fallout would have been like if you did make it real-time action? What would have been needed to come out of the game? What about the balance of the perks would have changed? Do you think multiplayer could have worked in the Fallout universe? I've talked about remaking Fallout and also what I would change today in two separate videos, and I'll link them below. So I just want to make it clear off the top that I would not have made Fallout real time. Not back in 97, not today in 2025. And this is despite, and I've mentioned this, Interplay Marketing approached me in 1996, a year before we came out, and they wanted Fallout to be made real time because of Diablo. They pushed several times, and the way I finally got it to stop was just pointing out how much money I would need and time. And then they finally stopped. So, just so you and GidKid100 understand, this is a hypothetical thought experiment. I do not think it's a good thing to do. I just am saying, hey, if you wanted to make Fallout into real time, what would you have to do? And before I even start talking about that, let me just remind you, because I made Arcanum right after Fallout, and it has real-time combat, you can kind of view that as this is the real-time Fallout game I would have made in the 90s. Although I guess Arcanum came out in 2001. Let's say between the bridge between the 20th and 21st centuries. So that's what I would have done then. You can watch a video about Arcanum's real-time and turn-based combat. I'll link it below. So what I'm going to talk about here is what would I do now? If for some reason I was being forced to remake Fallout as a real-time game, what steps would I take? There's a lot of stuff that would have to change. So many things. Mostly because the player wouldn't have time to consider their actions like they do in turn-based. It's one of the reasons I like turn-based games. They feel more tactical, even if they aren't, even if the real-time game offers just as many options, because you have to do it quickly, I feel like I can't take advantage of those options. Even when there's real-time with pause, I feel like everything's going at once, so I can't watch the things I want to watch in order to respond to them the way I want to respond. It's why I like turn-based. Let's throw all that out the window and say, okay, what would I have to change? I'm forced to change this game. First of all, action points are gone. We throw them out the window. So you have to ask yourself questions like, what does the attribute agility do now? Because one of its big chunks, one of its big traits was it gave you action points. By the way, there's a lot of things that reference action points. Attributes, perks, weapons, weapon modes. What are you going to do with all that? You're going to throw it all away is what you're going to do with all that. Let's go through these one by one, and I'll talk about things that you can do to get rid of all that action point reference. Let's talk about weapons first, and I mentioned they have modes. That's like when you pick up a weapon, you have single shot or burst shot, or for a spear you have, thrust, or you can throw it. You can still have those modes, and when I talk about UI, you're going to have to come up with some better way of the player indicating to the game, hey, I want to do a different thing with this weapon. And then they can have different rates of use. So a single shot from a gun can be done more frequently than a burst shot. But the burst shot, of course, has the advantage of it does a lot of shots at once. And then you have to wait before you can burst shot it again, probably to reload. And reloading can take a while too. That rate of use can be controlled to give you more of a balancing in real time. One thing we should probably bring up since we're talking about weapons is what to do with called shots, which are a big part of Fallout. You can do what some games have done, where when you decide to do a called shot, it stops time, you select some part on the enemy to shoot at, time restarts. You can also do what some games do, which is it slows down time a lot. And by how much? Maybe that could be a new perk. It slows down time. You pick something, but you have to do it relatively quickly. But time is slowed, and if that's something you're having trouble with, maybe you can buy perks and items that slow it down more, but time is slowed. And then you can have real-time called shots. Just where you aim at the monster is where it's going to try to apply the hit. So if you're shooting him in the head, you're going to call shot to the head. If you're shooting the leg, you're going to call shot to the leg. You don't necessarily are guaranteed the called shot effect. It may just treat it as a regular shot, but you can do called shots that way too. Let's jump into skill use, since there's a whole I call it a plethora, but it's more of a morass. There are so many skills that you will have to decide on an individual basis whether they should stop, slow, or be done in real time. For example, lockpicking probably makes sense to stop time, especially if you're going to have some kind of mini game. If you're not, then it doesn't really need to stop time. If you may want to keep different skills, because I talked about in the remake that I'd probably take first aid and doctor and just combine them, which they did in later Fallouts. But what you may want to do is go, hey, let's keep them separate and say first aid can be done in combat, where doctor is disabled in combat. Doctor assumes you can sit down, listen, use instruments on them, do suturing, apply bandages and wrap. First aid is really fast. First aid, I think they call it trauma, infield medics. It's designed for combat, and then doctor is designed for out of combat. Because of that, you can decide that neither of them stop time, but doctor is either disabled or you literally can't use it, because if you're doing doctor and you get hit, it gets interrupted. So you can all make all kinds of choices like that, and then basically sell it as first aid is your in combat skill and doctor is your out of combat skill. Another thing you can think about with skill use, because you don't have action points anymore, is you can introduce cooldowns. Cooldowns, there are players who love that, players who hate it, players who used to like it but think it's being overused. I would wade into that whole controversy cautiously. I would probably lean towards cooldowns, but particular kinds. Like some skills, I would say you can do this and then it goes into a very brief cooldown. Others you can use this and it goes on a long cooldown, and others are once per combat. Just talking about skill use makes me think of a lot of other actions the player can take and how you're going to have to try to think of them differently in real time. Healing is a good one. Is healing instant, or is it heal over time, called a hot? It's the opposite of a dot, a damage over time. Doing instant healing makes it very similar to turn-based. You jam that sim pack in, bam, you instantly get that health. But since you're real time, you probably should think about doing it as a hot. You inject the stim pack and your health bar starts growing. So it can grow while it also gets knocked down from damage. And that gives you an additional leverage when you're trying to decide what different healing techniques there are. Some can be small but instant. Some can be larger and hot. Some can be larger and very slow hot. Some can be really fast. Some can be a combination, a little bit instant and a little more that's hot. You have a lot of choices to make there. Looting is another action the player can take that you have to decide. Are you going to do it in real time? If you make it so that clicking on them doesn't stop time and bring up a big interface, you're going to have to keep that interface very, very simple. The UX for looting should be very easy to use, easy to understand, and fast. Because of that, I would recommend not going with a grid-based looting. Because when you pick it up and you have to find a spot on the grid for it, that's too slow. You probably just click on the things you want, and they get thrown into your inventory unless your inventory gets full. That brings up, of course, inventory. Do you want bringing up inventory, the player's current inventory, to stop time or not? If you do, you can make a nice complicated inventory. If you don't, you need to make it very streamlined. And then you need to think about that streamlined UI is still going to be there when you're outside of combat and have all the time in the world. Or do you want a different user interface? I would not recommend that. I would not one interface for combat and another for outside of combat. You can also simplify it by saying there are certain things you can reach in combat. Things like top of pack or things you put on your belt or whatever. And then everything else you cannot touch once combat starts. Of course, this brings up the whole UX experience. And that could be a whole video on itself, one which I don't even think I'm qualified to do. I will just say this. I foresee lots of hotkeys being done in this game. I see hotkeys, banks of hotkeys. It's why games like Diablo work. You just need fast access to certain things, skills, items, weapons, and hotkeys give you that. One of the original questions, though, was what about perks? What would have to change and what wouldn't? Some perks would still work, just as they are. Things like you get to move faster when you're stealthing, when you're crouching, or you get bonus experience points, or bonus hit points, or bonus DR. Those all still work in a real-time game. A lot of them have to be completely tossed out or completely remade. Things like earlier sequence, which in turn-based gives you an earlier point in the sequence in which everybody's taking turns. There is no sequence anymore. You could redo it to say you move faster right when combat starts. I don't even know how to do that. I would probably just toss it. Because action points are gone, you have to get rid of all the perks that mention action points. Action Boy, bonus hand-to-hand attacks, bonus move, bonus rate of fire. And if you don't want to throw them out, you have to heavily modify them to somehow control the speed of the PC attack or movement rate. You're effectively making new perks, and they'll be balanced totally separately than you would have had done if they were action points. And that brings me to this. After remaking all of this, everything I've mentioned, everything, you're going to have to make a balance pass on all this. Because there's no way you're going to get it right at the bat. You're going to have to look at all your perks and all your skills and all the user interfaces you've made and figure out if there are friction points on those or things nobody would ever buy or take or do because it's just too complicated for real time. Which brings me to the last question about multiplayer. And I've answered this before, and I don't think my answer would change making Fallout real time, even though a lot of people think, hey, it's real time now, let's add multiplayer. No. I view Fallout, the setting, as a desolate, uncaring world where the choices that the player makes changes things. Multiplayer ruins all of that. It doesn't feel desolate when there's a bunch of vault suit wearing people bunny hopping around and talking to you and laughing and, telling you to get good. That doesn't feel desolate to me. It doesn't feel uncaring if you're running around with a group of your friends and you're all backing each other up. It doesn't feel like your choices are making a difference when you go to some town and somebody got there before you and killed everyone so that there are no vendors, no fault of your own. So it's so hard to keep Fallout, what I consider to be Fallout-y at its core, to add multiplayer, that I would say, no, just don't do it. Just skip it. Anyway, looking at my notes, I think that's everything I would do to change Fallout to real time. I would never do it. But if I had to do it, that's what I'd do. And GidKid100, I hope this answered your question.